Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, we're recording this on Friday morning. It's October 17th. I don't say this to be braggadocious because until the other Joe is back, I don't really care too much. But the man over my left shoulder, right shoulder, if you're watching the video, Jamar Chase, had an absolutely incredible game last night. I was pretty convinced the Bengals were always going to lose that game anyways. But what I will say, Nick, the Bengals winning on a Thursday just frees up my whole weekend because there's no stress. There's nothing to worry about. It's almost like rewatching your favorite movie, right? I'm going to sit down on Sunday and I'm going to watch football, but I already know the ending because the Bengals have already won. So it's like just getting to enjoy something for the joy of it. You know, you don't have to worry about what the chase might be or what the dramatic ending might be. Like, I already know the ending. The Bengals have already won. On Sunday, I can just sit down and just watch football.
I'm very happy for you. Out of interest, how do you typically watch a game like that? Because it starts at starts at 1 a.m. roughly in the UK?
Well, it's perfect because we're talking about StreamTime Sports. One of the sports subscriptions I do pay for NFL Game Pass via DAZN. There was a time when I was younger and perhaps maybe filled with more optimism. I would stay up and watch the Bengals live via Game Pass. These days, it is not worth my lack of sleep. So typically, like this morning, I woke up at 6 and basically pretty much within about an hour of the game finishing, DAZN wraps it up in multiple different ways. So you can have the full replay, which I don't know why anybody would ever voluntarily choose to watch ads, but like it's 4.5 hours long, but it has all the commercials, all the halftime show, all that stuff. They do the 40-minute version, which is how I watch any non-Bengals replay game. You can do the short highlights of it, but they've now introduced, as of last year, an ad-free one. So it kind of sits between the full game replay and the 40-minute version. So basically, we've said one of the things we don't like about the 40-minute is you don't get any of the commentary in between plays.
Yeah.
This basically shows you everything. It cuts out all the commercials, cuts out halftime. So it runs about 2 hours. So full game replay is about 3.5 to 4 hours, depending on the game. 40 minutes, somewhere between 40 and 45. The ad-free version is somewhere between 145 and 2 hours. So if it's the Bengals, I will watch the ad-free full replay. So there you go. Like you get multiple choices. It's quite nice.
Well, no, I've got it now as well, actually, but I've never endeavored trying anything over the 40-minute. I do watch the 40-minute. Quite often, I try and pick one game where I pick a 40-minute condensed, and then sometimes I'll try some others, but I'll only watch it for a bit because I just want to feel, mainly for like a bit of fantasy purposes, like more about how does that player look in real life, the eye test sometimes. Agreed. So I might watch a couple of drives and just see what the game felt like, and then I normally go to the 5-minute version. But I find the 5-minute is too short.
Yeah,
I feel like if you want to get a good feel for the game, it is just highlights, but it is just the key highlights. But I feel like you miss so much in that 5-minute version. So, but I noticed that I think we may have talked about this before. I'm having deja vu moment here, but there's a 15 or 20-minute vertion that NFL
that's
publishes.
That's on YouTube.
Yeah. And that's good. That's
very good. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a bit curious as to why either DAZN hasn't found a way to also include that version just because it's already in existence. Because I feel like it would sit nicely on that platform, complemented by all the others they have there. But look, really, really happy for you to give you. I know that when the Bengals win, you're a happier man, and I'm expecting to be even more productive work-wise as well. But what I've found that blew me away for that game, I watched just the quick highlights on that, was the average age of the two quarterbacks is was it 81? I think for the two or 82.
So the combined age. So fun fact, Nick, I was listening to this. This is only the fourth time two quarterbacks over the age of 40 have played each other in a start. It's a bit of a trick question. Can you name the other quarterbacks in the three matchups? Or any of the quarterbacks?
Wow.
Here's I'll tell you, Nick. The trick question part of it is it's actually been the same two quarterbacks in all three previous games.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not Brady and Manning, is it?
Brady is one of them. The other one played in the NFC South.
God, I'm not good with my divisions. NFC South.
Black and gold.
Roethlisberger.
Black and gold, but the other black and gold. The true gold.
The true gold. I'm so bad with these types of
Drew Brees.
Drew, of course, the
Yeah.
Saints. Yes.
So I do think
Now
it's
that you
funny
say that, as soon as you give me one of the divisional play teams, I know all four,
yeah.
but I don't know where's where. Interesting. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, maybe it still gives me, a little shining light of hope
Yeah.
that basically,
Yeah.
I've still got a chance if these
Yeah.
40-year-olds can basically play the most athletic sport in the world, where they drafting like crazy athletic
20,
quarterbacks that can
21-year-olds.
run, 100-meter sprints in like 11 seconds and also throw the ball 70 yards. And then you've got these 41-year-olds. I mean, Joe Flacco he looks older than 40, I have to say, with that beard, the beard, and actually Aaron Rodgers, to be honest, with that gray growth coming through, it just makes it ages them even more. But yeah, fair play. So, yeah, good for you. Congratulations. And actually, good for me a little bit, because although I did trade away Jamar Chase in one of my teams. So
I've got him in 2 teams, so that helps.
I traded him away. I gave up on him a few weeks ago. I did it for Josh Jacobs, which was kind of has worked out pretty good. But that game was incredible. Anyway, we need to move on. But always good to get turn on the phone and check out some of the highlights from the NFL. I am addicted. And if anyone who's listening, we talk about it a lot. Tell us what you think. Do you want to hearing our anecdotes around the NFL? And if you want, do you want more, or do you want to join our fantasy team, which I'm fantasy competition, which I'm thinking about setting up for next year? So let us know what you think.
Yeah, join the SportsPro Fantasy League. Absolutely about that. But to your point, Nick, we will talk business. And one of the things coming up, big business, it's almost in a month from now, almost to the day, if we look forward, is the SportsPro Media Summit in Madrid. Now, immediately, Nick, we have had some conversations. It's gone through different iterations. It's been the SportsPro OTT Summit, it's been SportsPro Madrid, and now it's SportsPro Media Summit. It's gone through some different iterations. We've talked in previous episodes over the years, kind of that evolution was to recognize that OTT at one point was the big shiny thing, and now it is one part of all the different layers of media that needs to go on, whether that's your linear broadcast, whether that's what you're doing on social media and YouTube. It's just one part of the whole pie. But one of the things we are introducing for this year's SportsPro Media Summit that's a little bit different, if you're at SportsPro Live, you may have experienced this, is we've introduced some new forms into the event. And I guess, Nick, maybe the best way to describe it is it's almost kind of a mini event within the event. And the idea being that I think sometimes you go to events and you just don't go deep enough sometimes, Nick. Like, we find some of the content, it only scratches the surface. So with these forums, we're trying to go really deep into specific topics. So one of them, we have a YouTube forum, we have a social media content creators forum, we have a technology forum. One of the other forums that we'll kind of highlight today, because it's relevant to our interview, we're doing an advertising forum. But the idea is kind of giving these 2-hour blocks, 3-hour blocks. If we're going to deep dive into some of these topics, and one of the things we're going to try to do here with StreamTime over the next couple of weeks is bring you a couple interviews from some people that will be speaking at SportsPro Media Summit. Just to give you a little sneak peek. They'll have their own separate interviews there, but just for you guys to get a little bit of a taste of some of the deep dive stuff that we're going to try to do in Madrid. So, Nick, I don't know if you want to put another spin on that or how that sounds to you, if I've done it correctly. It is new, so everyone's got their own take on it.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. But look, the SportsPro Media Summit is really built. We basically sit back and we put on let's say the CXO hats of sports properties all across the globe. What are the biggest focuses they have right now in the industry? And now with the Media Summit, we've been able to focus on all the key topics under one roof with regards to sports media. So you'll have loads on media rights. You're going to hear loads of different great examples of successful OTT platforms that have been launched, and also some of the challenges they faced along the way. And really things like advertising, we've been talking loads about. We had to have a deeper focus on that. So you're going to hear from companies big and small, from Google to DAZN, and of course, Tubi, about how advertising is playing a role in and around sports and sports streaming and basically revenue generation around the live and non-live rights. And so I'm really excited about this event. I think it's both the most breadth and the most depth in any event we've ever had, particularly for our event in Madrid, which is, I'm not even sure how many years it's been now. I think it must be nearly eight or nine years now. Yeah. But I'm as excited as ever for this, because I think there are so many layers to the sports media strategies that sports properties are trying to undertake. And we're trying to really go deep on all of them here. So I don't think there's anything like this in the industry that covers the business, basically the art and science, the business and the tech, so to speak, of social media, of production of content, whether it be live or non-live, again, through the eyes of the sports properties themselves or for the platforms. And indeed, still keeping a huge focus on streaming and OTT, which is still such an important area of focus for everyone from top tier right down to the smaller challenger organizations that do exist. Exhibit of the example we had on a pod a few weeks ago with David Guinan.
Yeah, well, one of the people that is going to be speaking in Madrid, and someone that you had the opportunity, Nick, to have an interview with prior to, is David Salmon, who's the EVP Managing Director for Tubi International. Now, Tubi is someone we know is very heavily in the advertising space, but they were founded based, in the U.S. North American market. But David's remit is to start spreading that internationally. So maybe just give people a little bit of a heads up, sort of kind of what they can expect. And then I think sort of as well, kind of, we know the advertising space is growing. Tubi has built a successful business and is growing in sports, and sort of why sports is so important for the advertising model. But sort of what does that look on an international stage? Because I would say it feels like some of that stuff is a bit more advanced in, the U.S., but it still feels like Europe, you're still talking about your Sky Sports, your DAZNs. It doesn't feel as advertisement driven, and sort of maybe David gives a little bit of insights into what he sees, how they can duplicate some of the success they've had in other markets where they're founded as they expand.
Yeah, it was great to talk to David. And I've spoken to him in the past, offline as well. And he comes with such an incredible background. Like, he was one of basically the founders of IMG Arena and basically what became Endeavor Streaming. He was the CTO there and at Endeavor, and indeed IMG is part of that business for well over 10 plus years. I think it might have been close to 15 if I remember correctly. So he's been in the thick of launching a real tech focused organization and business that's been super serving sports for a long time. He's had to go through the journey of being part of all the changes that went through Endeavor and IMG, alongside when the sports industry was going through so many changes along the way. And when I saw him first get this role, I was a bit surprised because he had the CTO as the job title for it, and thinking, wow, a CTO is going into an ND and EVP role to lead this business across so many markets. But then when you speak to him, very quickly you realize why, because he wasn't wearing the traditional just CTO pure tech hat before. He was part of the co-founders. He was part of the fabric of what Endeavor Streaming came to be, and indeed what they built over time. And now he's leading a really exciting journey that Tubi is going through. And obviously the Tubi really came to prominence for those that aren't quite familiar with it or may have forgotten. They are basically probably the number one AVOD platform in the US, partially owned by, I think it's Fox, if I remember correctly. And they were co-streaming the Super Bowl and got incredible numbers, delivered largely a flawless experience relatively to what we've seen in the past at an incredible scale. And that really put them on the map, I think, internationally to be paying more attention to what they're doing. And now when you have an organization like Tubi coming into play in markets, I think David's across about 10 of them from memory. You've got the UK, Australia, and Mexico, all very interesting and different and journeys. Really interested to hear how they are approaching it, whether it is the use of sports and what they're doing to maximize the value that live sports does bring to the table, particularly with advertisers, but also how they're just even managing how they manage the platform to make sure engagement and consumption is at its highest. And they've got an incredible catalog of stuff. And given David's background in sports, it's great to hear from someone who is leading basically a huge expansion of one of the world's leading advertising-led streaming platforms.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly, Nick. And like you said, definitely stay in tune for the rest of the episode. But again, also, it just gives you a little bit of a taste. If you've not already gone your pass to the SportsPro Media Summit, David is going to be one of the featured speakers along with others. Like I said, particularly like if you have an interest in advertising, going to be a whole dedicated space for that. Like I said, there'll be other ones on YouTube specifically, social media content creators, technology, other different areas. And I think hopefully by bringing this interview with you from David, just gives you a bit of, what you would be in store coming to the Media Summit from there. So from here, we'll hand things over to your interview, Nick.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. And everyone, if you are interested in coming to the Media Summit, reach out to either Chris or myself, and we might be able to sort out a special StreamTime Sports podcast, a special offer for the event. Just give us a shout and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
So, David, it's been a while since we've last spoken, but great to have you on the StreamTime Sports podcast. Now, there's so many areas I want to cover with you. We've spoken before about lots of things happening on the industry, and with your background, I think there's some interesting stuff I want to cover what's happened now in sports. But now your role as MD of Tubi International, you've got quite a fascinating set of markets to be across. So Tubi is quite I use beast in the nicest sense of the word, but is expanding rapidly, and it's starting to get a lot of the attention of the sports industry as it grows its breadth of a content and library. So just, I guess, take us into, David, like, what is Tubi, both maybe comparing a little bit with what it is in the States, because obviously that's its home base, and then what you've now grown it to across the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so Tubi, I mean, I'll kind of go back to Tubi's founding story, because I think it sort of tells, it sort of provides a bit of narrative for the growth we've seen up until 2025. So Tubi was originally founded in 2014 over on the West Coast in the US. And like many tech companies, it has a big pivot in its history. So originally when it was kind of founded, it was founded as a business called AdRise. And AdRise was being set up as an ad tech platform to support the major Hollywood studios. Tubi itself was launched as a brand to essentially prove the advertising integration model, to be able to sort of provide a demonstration of what you could do with AdRise as a piece of technology. It picked up a ton of steam, a lot of user attention, a lot of user adoption. And they ended up pivoting the business to really make Tubi the hero brand and to go all in on this kind of D2C vision of free streaming for everyone. The business kind of grew really, really rapidly up until 2020. It was then acquired by Fox. And in particular, over the past 5 years, it has really kind of gone from strength to strength. So we're now kind of at 100 million monthly active users. We're available in 11 markets, including all of North America. And we passed $1 billion in annual revenue this year. So the business really has become a bit of a juggernaut. The kind of footprint is started in the US, scaled out to Canada, Australia, Mexico, Central America, and most recently we launched in the UK back in July last year.
And so what are some of those other markets? And really, obviously, that is what you're responsible for, is all those markets outside the US, right?
Yeah, for sure. So the kind of longest tenured of those markets is Canada, where Tubi has a really, really big footprint. We're a kind of leader in free streaming in that market. We reach 1 in 3 Canadians over the age of 18. So we really do have, a kind of a real fondness for that market and a really big user base. Our fastest growing market at the moment actually is Mexico, where we've embarked on a really, really interesting kind of very sports forward strategy that's kind of unique to Tubi globally. And then our youngest market, but one obviously I'm fairly familiar with, is the UK, where since we launched in July last year, we've seen some really quite amazing growth and a lot of adoption, in particular in a market that is always being defined by free streaming. We've still really managed to find a home by offering a really, really diverse selection of really brilliant content, from kind of Hollywood studio licensed films all the way through to kind of endless box sets, to the kind of weird, the wonderful, the brilliant, the broad. It really is a something for everyone experience.
So let's talk about the sports equation there. Where does sports fit in to the business? I mean, Tubi made the headlines, particularly this year globally, with its success around delivering the Super Bowl. It's obviously in the US, but it's no stranger to live sports rights, that's for sure. So just talk a bit about where sports fits into that content mix.
Yeah, so sports plays an increasingly significant role to the way that Tubi thinks about its content mix, but it does vary per market in the way that sports rights are typically going to be sold on a per market basis, and it means that therefore you will have a slightly different approach because your portfolio is going to change. The Super Bowl itself was a real coming out party for Tubi, both on the sports side, but I think more generally, it was a real demonstration of the scale of kind of Tubi's footprint in the US in particular. We were the exclusive digital destination for the 2025 Super Bowl in the US. We peaked at 15.5 million concurrent consumers, delivered in 4K, low latency, completely free. I think over the course of the weekend, Tubi reached 24 million unique viewers for the kind of game day programming. And it really was an opportunity for us to demonstrate the technical capacity of Fox and of Tubi. Interestingly enough, I mean, that was probably a fairly unique event in the way that the Super Bowl is just generally a unique event in the sports landscape in the US. But we have also then been sort of adding sport in lots of different ways to our programming mix. So some of it would be live, like whether it's the Super Bowl in the US, whether it's Liga MX, the Mexican Premier League, available for free on Tubi in Mexico. But we also lean in a lot to some of the kind of shoulder programming and lifestyle programming that surrounds sports that's better consumed on demand. Like a good example of this, we actually released a really brilliant documentary about Naomi Osaka that came out just before the US Open this year. And it was particularly timely because she managed to get all the way to the semifinals. But it's like a really beautiful story called The Second Set about the kind of process of returning to professional athletics after having her first child, and talking about the kind of struggles of trying to be a professional sports person alongside being a full-time mother. And those types of stories, we think Tubi is a great platform ultimately to tell them. At the same time, you know, over the past couple of quarters, we released a really brilliant exclusive documentary about kind of Draymond Green, the NBA basketball player. We had a brilliant 6-part series about Cam Ward called Zero Star that was available in the US, which again, it tells a slightly broader story. It isn't totally focused just on the live experience, but about some of those evergreen moments that really shaped these sports people.
The thing with Tubi that makes it quite unique and special, particularly at the time of launch, was its focus on an ad supported or ad funded business model. Just talk us through. I mean, and also just take a step back there. Fox has been Fox and Fox's ownership has always been forthright in the fact that they were very patient, waiting to come to market, while many of the other streaming competitors hemorrhaged, let's say, lots of money trying to get ready for this new era of streaming. Fox, I think, basically, I would say, Fox kind of won a lot of that with one of the best approaches in the market as a result of that. And Tubi was really that sort of turning point, I guess, in their approach to taking on streaming as a key vertical. But again, being ad funded first. Just talk a bit about Tubi's approach. How is it driving revenue? Is it just through traditional ad-funded programmatic? What is the different levers you're able to pull to maximize the value of the content you have on platform?
Yeah, so Tubi as a kind of Tubi as a platform has always been 100% ad-funded, 100% free for consumers to use. We do this through offering definitely this kind of traditional rotational advertising products, pre-rolls, mid-rolls. And those are kind of bought and sold both programmatically, also on a kind of direct upfront basis. We sort of operate across those different brand advertising markets. I would say, like, the way that we're relatively unique, I mean, for one thing, our entire user base is addressable, which is like a really, really big win for advertisers. One of the problems with the kind of bolting on of advertising tiers that a lot of the SVOD platforms have done over the past few years is that actually there are entire cohorts of users that you can't access if you're an advertiser trying to buy through those platforms. You know, they all have the most expensive tier available that potentially means you get no advertising at all in your experience. And whilst it's great that consumers are, you know, some consumers are able to sort of opt out based on preference, it does mean that for brand advertisers looking for reach, they can't address those consumers through those channels. The other thing that Tubi's always offered, and it's been a big part of the kind of more general Fox pitch, is that we offer really amazing access to kind of younger, more diverse, incremental audiences. You know, more than 50% of our audience in the US, they're Gen Z or they're millennial. You know, it's a very different demographic set to the ones potentially you'd buy through broadcast and cable. 67% of our users are cord cutters or cord nevers, which means if you're a brand advertiser looking for reach, if you're spending that money through broadcast or cable channels, you're not going to be able to access these consumers. And it means that every dollar spent on Tubi offers really, really strong incrementality, which is what a lot of marketers and brand advertisers are looking for when they think about where to deploy their capital. And then one of the ways we've actually been able to sort of manage the balance of offering advertising, but really also driving a lot of consumer attention and engagement has been by being very judicious about how we think about ad load. So Tubi as a platform targets, it's between 4 to 6 minutes of ads per hour of playback. For kind of contrast, so if you look at something which has extremely high ad load like US cable, that's going to be 15 to 17 minutes of advertising per hour of playback, which as a European feels quite astonishing anyway. But even, for example, in the UK, during kind of the sort of peak times in broadcast TV, so kind of in the evenings on an ITV or a Channel 4, you're going to get up to 12 minutes of advertising per hour of playback. So we're going to be less than half of that. And this is alongside us offering Hollywood titles, endless box sets, amazing indies. So we really think it offers really brilliant value to consumers.
It definitely sounds that way. I mean, how are you getting, now that the big challenge has been for some time is to see, for the industry has been waiting for more advertising investment to come from the advertisers. And that seems to be picking up a lot of steam now. But just how are you managing the flow of advertising in, particularly because you're across international? I'm guessing a lot of that spend is coming out of the US still, but how much of that versus your international, how much is local, how much is international? And is there a particular strategy you need to take basically to maximize the fact that you're an advertising only platform while the others aren't?
Yeah, so I would say, so in each of our markets, the vast majority of our revenue is going to come through sort of domestic advertisers, or it's going to be holdcos and agencies buying on a domestic market basis. So it's not like, for example, in Canada, most of the revenue comes through the US. It is domestic Canadian advertisers looking to access kind of reach for Canadian consumers. I mean, definitely there is increasingly, and you see this both from a consumer basis as well as an advertiser dollar basis. There is now a bit of a shift happening where traditional advertising dollars that would have gone through broadcast and cable are now shifting into premium CTV inventory, which is great because obviously we're kind of big beneficiaries of that as a sort of tailwind in the industry. And actually, I do think you can also over-exaggerate that transition, both on the engagement and the dollar side. People a lot of the time sort of look at the US and use that as a great example of what's happening globally in terms of the shift of attention, where now more than 50% of time spent in front of a TV now is spent in streaming services. But actually, the US is a bit of a leader in that way. So in Canada, it's actually still 80% of time spent in front of a TV is still actually on broadcast. So again, it's one of those things where maybe the rhetoric is pulled slightly ahead of the reality of where consumers are spending their time and attention. But nonetheless, we do have an expectation, in particular as whether it's sort of the Netflixes of the world, the Amazon Primes, the YouTubes, are starting to get these tier one live events and make them available exclusively through streaming. That is going to start to shift dollars because eyeballs will move with them. And ultimately, brand marketers want reach, and that will be where you start to find it.
So you talked about how the ads are being sold. How are the ads being served? We're seeing different types of technology come to the fore, and with your background, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second, you've got a strong tech background. I'm sure you're paying a lot of attention to that side of things. How are you just using traditional ad breaks? Are you using overlays? Are you using what different other techniques are you using to bring in ads into the experience? And obviously, just not disrupting, but I guess making sure that you're maximizing the advertising opportunity.
Yeah, so Tubi, partly based on its founding story, advertising has always been a first-class way of the way we think about sort of Tubi's product offering. Advertising is a kind of a key pillar. So the way that we think about the stakeholders that we're ultimately responsible for serving, whether it's advertisers, whether it's consumers, whether it's content owners, we want advertising to be, a really integrated part of that experience rather than it being sort of disruptive, coming in right at the wrong moment during a particular piece of content or interrupting the climax of a particular, like a thriller or a horror film or whatever. So we are definitely, we do kind of use traditional ad breaks where you'll have pre-roll pods, mid-roll pods. There's a lot of stuff there that is a lot smarter than you would be able to ultimately drive through traditional kind of TV advertising experiences. So for example, you can obviously have much better personalization and targeting, and then also even kind of, as you move down the funnel to outcomes and sort of a lot of the measurement tools that are in place. We've obviously spent a lot of time and investment making sure marketers have all of those available. We also are seeing, I think, like a lot of our kind of competitors, a lot of focus on new ad products that go beyond the kind of traditional rotational media of pre-roll and mid-roll. So whether it is integrated sponsorship experiences built into the actual product experience, kind of whether it's thematic takeovers, whether it's pause ads, whether it's the ability to, as an advertiser, buy out sponsorship of a single asset and make it available ad-free for consumers. There are lots of these additional ways for brands to ultimately really drive these high-impact moments.
Mm. So with the different markets you're across, one of the and obviously, how are you deciding which market to ultimately go and launch in? Because you've picked 11 markets. There's a lot more out there to potentially keep launching into. So, just what is the tipping? Is there a tipping point? Are there key things you're looking at in a market before to, I guess, make that decision to pull the proverbial trigger?
Yeah, we've been thoughtfully expanding over the past 5 years. It hasn't been a sort of spray and pray approach where we try and kind of get everywhere and then see whether or not we can add value to consumers. We tend to look at a combination of competitive set in any market. We want to know that there is space for what we offer for consumers. We also will look at content availability, making sure that we can offer something that's really compelling and that sort of breaks through with consumers. And then we also look for sure at the advertising landscape. Is it sufficiently mature to be able to support an advertising-only business at our scale? So it's sort of a combination of those factors that really then drive our decision-making as we think about expansion.
So why not then go down, and this is obviously the question no doubt you get, is why don't go global? Why have you taken a market-by-market approach? Because you'll see a lot of streaming platforms now launch and they immediately try to be global from day one. Now, they obviously comes with lots of risks and costs associated to it, which I'm guessing is a deciding factor. But why the approach to be very thoughtful about each market?
I would say, I will probably start by saying I don't know how many streaming platforms have genuinely tried to go global. Some of them will, for example, just make their content available globally, but I don't know if that's really going global. It's more you happen to be in a market where somebody could stumble across your platform. Going global itself, I think, is significantly harder, and there aren't that many really major global video platforms. I mean, really, the only two I can think of would be Netflix and YouTube. I think in each market, you want to make sure that you are crafting an experience that really fits consumer preferences, really kind of fills a gap in terms of like consumer demand. And that takes time. It takes investment for sure. I mean, I think our CFO would have a heart attack if I said we're going to need to go global. But it requires us to put together an experience that we ultimately believe has a right to compete in that market. And just coming in with a sort of relatively thoughtless mishmash of content and hoping that consumers, if you build it, they will come as a strategy, that I don't think works. And ultimately, I think markets are too mature and competitive across the board for that to be a strategy that anyone should pursue.
So you said it's mature. How much more maturity do you expect to happen at a decent click, a decent rate to get you guys into a position where you can really unequivocally say we're successful in that market? Because I'm sure that the jury's out always for everyone, I guess, pretty much in this industry, at least for the near future. But in the UK and markets like that, is there anything? How much more growth and maturity do you need to get comfortable with where you're heading?
So, I mean, we tend not to have sort of one objective metric that's going to drive whether or not kind of we have product market fit. I think in all of the markets, we want to see our footprint growing. And we know that we're in a part of the industry that is scaling very quickly. In particular, sort of whether it's CTV advertising, whether it's CTV consumption, these are markets with good structural tailwinds behind them as people shift from broadcast into digital. I think the thing we're always looking for is increasing customer engagement and making sure that we're building brand affinity that breaks through both with consumers and with advertisers. And if that's what we're seeing, if a lot of those sort of health metrics are going sort of up and to the right, that lets us know that we're solving a problem and that we're well positioned.
So I recently saw that you were out in Australia for a big launch. How different is the ultimate platform? And you've intimated that there are some things you're looking at and some changes you make market to market. What are some of the differences, perhaps, say, looking at the Australia New Zealand platform to what you've launched at the UK?
So I would actually say Australia and the UK are quite similar, but Australia and the US would be quite different in terms of the experience. And that's partly due to the sort of maturity of our product offering in those markets. And it's also to do with like strategically how we're positioned. So in Australia, for example, we offer a 100% on-demand service, whereas in the US, we also have both on-demand as well as then a large kind of live channel experience driven by a combination of live channels and fast channels. So that would be kind of one of the very kind of different product features. We also have varying content licensing in each market based on how we ultimately want consumers to understand the Tubi value proposition. It's not the same in every market. the US has by far our largest content offering. In the US market, we offer 300,000 movies and TV episodes. I mean, it is just a staggering amount of content. It's the largest premium content library in the world. And in Australia, we offer the largest in that market. We're at about 125,000 movies and TV episodes. But obviously, it's kind of then slightly dwarfed when you comp it to our US footprint. So I think you would tend to find that our positioning really depends, well, or at least the product offering depends on our positioning. What is the problem we're looking to solve with consumers? And I would say, obviously, the US is our most mature market because it's the one we were founded in and launched in. It is the largest of the markets that we operate in. And therefore, a lot of the time, it's going to see early investment in areas that potentially we then look to expand across our international footprint.
One thing that strikes me with the Tubi business is you're going into markets, you're being strategic. But the fact that you don't have that subscription channel is it makes it interesting because then your marketing side has to really change. You are focusing on the content even more. You're focusing on the experience, I'm guessing, with how you are marketing it. Whereas I feel like a lot of the other platforms that are subscription first are so focused on price marketing that's all you end up seeing. And that's maybe a biased or a subjective view, but I feel like that's constantly in your face. Do you think that is that one of the reasons? I even saw that you're the CEO who's ex Vimeo as well, who's recently, I think somewhat recently joined the Tubi business, has emphasized the tagline that because Tubi will be free forever was the line. Just why is there such a double down on that? Is it because it really helps the storytelling part of the brand, of the platform? Because the flip side of that could be everyone will tell you need to be maximizing the value of your rights. So hybrid is the best approach and creating an alternative solution makes a lot of sense. So why are you really doubling down on the advertising part of it?
So I think kind of there's a few things there to sort of unpack at. One thing is definitely for a lot of the subscription platforms, you're right. A lot of their market positioning has to focus on price because it's like the big barrier to entry for being able to understand the value of those services. And it's something that we're ultimately not constrained by. You know, the experience for a big SVOD platform is that they've probably got to hit you with enough information about a couple of really, really big upcoming releases with big stars in, and then an idea of pricing and potentially some sort of a promo deal to sort of drive you through the funnel from awareness to consideration to conversion. The Tubi model is much easier. We go from awareness to conversion immediately because the moment you click on, for example, you turn on your Roku TV and you see a tile from Tubi front and center in the home screen, the moment you click on that, you're in that experience, you're watching that content. So for us, it's very low friction and it gets users to the point of value immediately. So it does give us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we position ourselves. I also think it means that we don't have to obsess as much over individual single blockbuster titles that we have to break the bank to ultimately support. So an example of this would be like, just say that there is a new season of The Witcher coming out. You can guarantee that every single consumer is probably going to get targeted with some sort of kind of pre-launch campaign that talks a lot about sort of, The Witcher being front and center. And that when you, as a user of Netflix, log into the homepage, you're also probably going to see it front and center because they want to drive all of their consumers into that single title. But that will be regardless of whether I'm predisposed at all to watch it. And there is kind of a cost to me as a consumer having a piece of content that potentially I'm not likely to watch being front and center. The Tubi model is very much around the idea of we want to offer ultimate choice. We actually don't want a single title to have to make or break our quarter. We want people to always see content that's hyper relevant to their personalized preferences. And as a business, Tubi has spent a lot of time and investment building out machine learning based personalization and a lot of the discovery algorithms that drive the experience to be able to get consumers into the areas of fandom and passion that they really fall in love with. And at Tubi, we have this term of getting users into their own personalized rabbit holes. We know that choice and preference is very diverse, and we want to be able to super serve every single consumer on our platform.
So of the markets that you cover and work across, what are the main areas? I mean, some of them might be obvious, but can you go in a bit of detail as to just where is Tubi being consumed And is it pretty consistent across the board, market to market? Is it mainly just on connected TVs? And if so, what sort of scale? Is it within different platforms that you're finding the engagement as well? Just give us a bit of a sense of what that behavior you're seeing around consumption looks like.
So Tubi is predominantly consumed on smart TV, and that, by when I say smart TV, I really mean CTV, right? Whether it's a box that you plug in like an Apple TV, whether it's a dongle like a kind of like a Roku, whether it's an integrated experience like the kind of Samsung smart TV operating system that actually sits in your device when you plug it in. We're available on all of those. Our model is about being extremely ubiquitous and available everywhere on the biggest screen in the home. In different markets, mostly based on device penetration, we will find that we will have, in North America, everybody knows that Roku has a really, really big footprint. Amazon Fire has a really big footprint. There are a number of others. Google TV in particular has a lot of penetration. So we will find that we'll be more heavily weighted on those devices in those territories. As you shift across into Europe, actually you tend to see, for example, I think Samsung smart TVs are the kind of number one device in terms of distribution. So we'll find that our weighting will sit slightly different in every market, but we are primarily consumed on CTV, and that's really where most of our engagement sits. You can also get Tubi on your phone. You can kind of watch it on the web. But generally, if people want to settle into a 2-hour movie, they generally tend to find themselves gravitating to the sofa in front of the bigger screen in their homes.
Are there any interesting consumption behaviors that you see differ from, say, like Costa Rica and Ecuador to a UK and Australia?
Well, I mean, obviously the kind of content mix is extremely different. So for example, in sort of Mexico and Central America, a lot of our consumption comes from people either consuming, we have this really brilliant premium sports offering available in Mexico and Central America. So right now, if you are like a diehard soccer fan, and obviously those kind of Mexico and Central America, those are markets slightly defined by soccer and the kind of, the consumers' sort of love of the game. If you're a diehard soccer fan, you will have an amazing home on Tubi, because we have completely for free Live League MX, which is the Mexican Premier League, Liga MX Femenil, which is the Mexican Women's Premier League. We have English Premier League available on Tubi. We have Ligue 1 available on Tubi. We have MLB available. I mean, it really is an astonishing breadth of sports content. So in those markets, partly because of the content, we might skew a bit more male, but we will also see people really gravitating towards more of the live experience. Whereas in the UK, actually, we tend to find, for example, that we have certain fandoms that really gravitate towards Tubi as being their home in the living room. So people who really love horror, we have, a very diverse and a very broad mix of that type of programming. People who love murder mystery, people who love thrillers. We found some really, really interesting areas where we seem to have these kind of power users who really enjoy the depth of the programming we offer in that space. And that would be quite distinct from the way that people consume content in Mexico and Central America, which is more sports defined because of the content mix.
Interesting. I mean, reflecting on your background, did you ever think you'd be working across horror titles as your main focus?
I would say, as somebody who's worked in video his entire career, I don't discriminate in the pixels. It's really just about creating a flawless experience that consumers love.
So reflecting on the fact that you have invested into sports rights in the Latin American market in particular, and in Mexico, just why was that able to happen? Was it just market dynamics? Basically, there wasn't the rights were there at a good enough price to pull that lever and make that move, or was there something else at play that you thought you'd trial a heavier investment perhaps into sports there versus others?
So a bit of all of the above. I mean, in particular, there was an amazing opportunity for us to acquire what is probably is the market leading sports rights offering in that market, has incredible breadth, and the kind of content available on Tubi, it's kind of astonishing. It's available for free. We also, however, we have a very strong partnership with the kind of Fox group, who are really now expanding their footprint in Mexico and in Central America. And really, we see Tubi as being a very complementary partner to the pay TV and the SVOD offering that they have in market. We can offer incredible reach. We can offer awareness. We can be complementary distribution for some of the premium rights that otherwise would sit exclusively in the kind of pay TV and SVOD windows. So it really, for us, it was a bit time and place in the way that kind of that does drive business decision-making a lot of the time, even if people claim it's deep strategy. And then the other side is really definitely leaning into wanting to better understand how sports can be a predominant factor in the Tubi value proposition in a single market.
So in those other markets, let's say the UK is an example, it's quite competitive, or dominated, I should say, by Sky and others like that. Where are you at in terms of looking at bringing more live sports to the platform, and in markets like Australia and New Zealand, which obviously has a hugely, again, competitive live sports rights market?
Yeah, I mean, the UK in particular, I think right now we don't have any immediate plans to add live sports to the experience. We really feel like what we offer as the largest free long-form kind of content catalog in the market, we're already finding a lot of engagement and product market fit. We don't know whether or not we'd really solve a problem in delivering sports in the UK. It's already super served by whether it's Sky, whether it's TNT, whether it's kind of, the amazing sports packages that a lot of the PSBs have as well. It doesn't feel necessarily like there's an easy gap in the market for us to fill. And in the end, again, like Tubi always anchors its decision-making on, does that solve a problem for consumers? Can we add real value that potentially exists that is not yet being met? And I think ultimately for us in the UK right now, and maybe this will change depending upon how, the next set of rights cycles shake out, it doesn't feel like maybe there's a great space for us to play in sport.
I mean, it feels like that you would definitely solve a problem for consumers, and that is the excessive cost that goes with buying access to some of these rights. But obviously, that market conditions play a pretty big role in terms of driving enough revenue to support that with the media rights fee that comes with those rights.
Yeah,
how do you?
I would also say, I mean, I do think that, so we will continue to expand the sports offering on Tubi in the UK, but again, it will most likely be very on-demand focused, right? It's going to be telling those brilliant stories that surround sports, rather than probably being the home of one of the like premium catalog like one of the premium tier 1 sports rights offerings.
A lot of the media rights model and approach has been under question now for quite some time. And then with your background, which I want to bring up in just a second, but what's your view then on the current way that is operating? Do you think I'm not too familiar with how much that differs from when you're buying catalogs and different titles that aren't sports related. So maybe give us a sense of how different they work, and whether you think that does need to change to open up the opportunity for some sports that are finding it more difficult to get access to the right sort of investment and visibility.
I mean, in general, I would say the sports rights market definitely is. It's going through a big period of transition as the kind of traditional buyers start to find their purchasing power is, starting to slightly creep down. But that is in some places being offset by some of these major, kind of global tech-enabled media businesses, whether it's the kind of Netflixes or the Disney Pluses or whatever, coming in and starting to selectively buy sport. It does feel like we are now fairly firmly out of the era, however, of large agencies being able to buy massive sports portfolios and ultimately sell all of them in one go to a single broadcaster because of the insatiable demand for potentially a tier 1 sport. And that was a key dynamic that probably subsidized a large number of the mid-tier federations for kind of the last 15, 20 years. The way that content is licensed for sports and on the entertainment side, they're quite different. Typically, if we were looking at, for example, some of the kind of Hollywood packages, which we might kind of acquire from some of our kind of studio partners on the West Coast, those will be kind of acquired on a very different basis to for example, like acquiring, whether it will be like Premier League rights or Liga MX rights or anything else. Some of that's going to be duration. Some of that is just going to be volume of content. Obviously, a sports federation is going to be quite limited by the number of events that they can avail because, if it's the Premier League, at most it's 380, but then you're going to lose the 3:00 kickoffs and then you're going to buy discrete packages. So it keeps skinnying it down. A lot of the time when you're buying studio titles, there's always going to be a conversation about cost, but there is going to be a larger breadth of selection just because of the volume of movies and TV episodes that have been produced over the years that still offer massive value to consumers.
Now, you've talked about the number of titles. You mentioned that a few times, and that is quite a lot of content. How on the platform are you making it so? Basically, what sort of technology, what sort of innovation are you using to make sure that the right type of content is being served when people get on platform?
So Tubi is placed, I mean, I think partly also we've been very lucky that we are sort of founded as a business kind of in San Francisco, kind of very much of that Silicon Valley culture where everything's extremely, sometimes excruciatingly data-driven as an organization. And that means we've put really, really high investments into recommendations and personalization algorithms that underpin every decision that's made for how we present content to consumers. So from the moment that you land on the platform, we're making sure that your homepage is different from my homepage, kind of more similar to the YouTube programming model, where every single person's youtube.com is a totally different experience based on preference. Tubi more closely mirrors that. And obviously, we don't have the sort of unlimited kind of UGC catalog that someone like a YouTube ultimately has, but the way that we approach discovery is the same. We want every consumer to see content that is personalized for them, rather than ending up with a single small merchandising team putting a title that you're unlikely to watch front and center and cross their fingers and hope that you're going to click it. And one of the things that we notice as we launch in different markets is a lot of the time we're competing with broadcast services, so kind of BVOD offerings, that really don't pay any attention to personalization. Every single time you open the homepage of a major BVOD service, it's as if somebody's hit a reset button and forgotten all of your preferences. The only thing that matters is the current top TV show based on their programming window, but that actually doesn't link directly to your preferences as a consumer. The Tubi model is much more around you open the homepage, and it's going to get better and better and better as you engage, because we'll be able to more deeply understand your preferences and then discover, and really surface those hidden gems for you.
So with your background being, I'm going to bring that up a little bit now, is obviously you were CTO at Endeavor Streaming. And so you were in the thick of going through the technological side and the product side of working on some of the biggest platforms in sports to make sure those experiences were harnessed. Firstly, I've got to ask, how have you found stepping away from being in the weeds of the tech and focusing on what is, I'm sure, a pretty robust and broad business and commercial remit, being across so many different markets? Is that shift being quite straightforward for you, or have you found that actually a bit of a challenge not to try and jump into the product side too much?
Look, I'm careful not to tread on anybody's toes. I think it's definitely been a bit of a pivot, but my role actually, so my kind of history at sort of what was IMG and then subsequently became Endeavor. So I helped set up IMG Gaming, which became IMG Arena, the kind of sports betting side of that organization. I ran engineering, product, operations, basically everything that wasn't the commercial side. And I actually then span out the part of the business that I ran into a wholly owned subsidiary that was later called Endeavor Streaming. During that period, whilst I was the CTO, I also had quite a broad commercial remit, helped build a lot of the partnerships, really helped doing a lot of, whether it's the pitches, the stakeholder management. It was a bit of, when you're in those organizations that are, operating like startups, you do wear a lot of hats. And I think really about my role here as kind of a continuation of the same thing. The sensitivity I have to technology probably helps me be a better colleague with our engineering and product partners. It means I'm not constantly coming to them and starting every sentence with, "Oh, I just have an easy change I need to request," because I understand the complexity of managing roadmaps, stakeholders, all of those things. But it also means that I would say Tubi, to tell the story of what makes Tubi special, it does require a little bit of an understanding of how we're different. And part of how we're different is the extraordinary technology platform that we ultimately run on.
How have you found then, I'm going to say, is a shift from moving from, say, more of the sports world and working with different sports stakeholders on their platforms and so forth into an organization like Tubi, and therefore part of this bigger, huge media organization? Did you find that there was a real difference in, I guess, the technical capabilities and understanding, and just how much more mature that is as an industry around streaming? Was there anything really clear that jumped out at you when you stepped into the role?
So, I mean, there are definitely there are some quite obvious differences between kind of sports streaming and then sort of entertainment streaming, which is more the space that Tubi plays in, even if we do have sports as part of our strategy. I think some of those are obviously a lot of my time when I was working in subscription-based streaming on the Endeavor Streaming side, right? When we were launching WWE Network and making sure that consumers around the world could pay in their preferred currency on their preferred platform through their preferred in-app payment provider. It was like a lot of complexity built into building those subscription tools, voucher tools, payment gates. I mean, you do spend a lot of time having to get that right, because conversion is such an important part of that journey. I think on the Tubi side, I mean, Tubi as a business just has so much scale. At 100 million monthly active users, it really then requires you to pay a lot more attention a lot of the time to the data and to be a lot more naturally data driven, because you really have the ability to look at engagement through a slightly different lens just because of the scale you operate at. And I also think it forces you to look at problems like content discovery in a very different way. The way that I would frame this would be, in sport, the most premium thing is the live edge. So like with sports rights, for example, the vast majority of them are being acquired for that live moment that people are consuming. And because of that, it means the way you think about discovery is just, how do you get live front and center? When somebody opens UFC Fight Pass, how do you make sure the pay-per-view is in position one and is getting them into it with the least friction possible? When you have then an entertainment experience where actually the premium is really based around personalization, it's around the idea that everybody has different tastes, different preferences, different fandoms. You actually then place a lot more of your investment in your time focused on discovery, personalization, because you want everybody's homepage to be different. So you do have these quite distinct models that are tied to the way people think about the value of the underlying content. And I think from transitioning from sports into entertainment, I realized how little I understood about that whole personalization and discovery world. But also, I kind of look at my colleagues at Tubi and think how good it is that they don't have to understand all of the esoteric details surrounding payment processing on a global basis, making sure that you have sort of very specific anti-piracy tools in place to guarantee that you're knocking bad actors who sign up for a subscription and then immediately terminate. It's a very different consideration set.
So looking back to that time for you, and I'm sure you're keeping at least half an eye on that industry and what's going on there. Obviously, Endeavor Streaming has recently been acquired as part of acquired by Delta Tray, and was obviously part of the bigger Endeavor group, which has gone through quite a bit of change and a change of ownership and the like over the last year or so. Firstly, talking about that type of industry, that type of business built around building platforms that are subscription-led platforms primarily in sports. What's your view on that as an industry now? Do you think they need to redefine as an industry the approach they have been taking around building direct-to-consumer and OTT-led platforms? Is subscription still the right model there? Or do they need to be looking at other approaches, which there are plenty?
So I think for sports federations, in particular mid-tier sports federations that are getting squeezed now by the kind of unbundling of kind of broadcast packages, I think it's a really hard decision to make. You've always been able to rely on potentially your broadcast revenue coming in, sort of on a very predictable basis. And all of a sudden, you are seeing a lot of fragmentation and potentially your reach really starting to diminish, which is going to put pressure on every commercial relationship you have, whether it's your broadcaster, whether it's your sponsors. I think for all of these federations, there is a huge opportunity to embrace the fact that you can now reach consumers through a ton of different channels that didn't used to exist. And they do, as a kind of mid-tier federation, and well, frankly, any sports federation, you should be focused on constant diversification of your business, making sure that you are building relationships with your fans across multiple platforms. So whether it's an algorithm change, whether it's the fact that the broadcast model is going to gradually become unbundled in various ways at different rates, you want to be able to make sure that that isn't a single point of failure for you. I do think we've probably gone past the point where every sports federation wants to kind of launch their own Netflix. There was a lot of that type of discussion, probably from sort of 2016 through to about 2022. I think people have realized how complicated and expensive it is to really build the requisite amount of scale and skill sets. And whether you're working, for example, with a third-party platform like an Endeavor Streaming, like a Delta Tray, like a ViewLift, like a Stay Live, right? There's quite a few people who still operate in that space. Whether or not you're sort of working with you want to work with a third-party partner like an Endeavor Streaming, a Delta Tray, a ViewLift, a Stay Live. Like, there are still lots of very credible options who can provide you with a kind of, Netflix in a box type experience. Actually, the complexity and the investment a lot of the time comes through customer acquisition. It comes through needing to build distribution partnerships with CTV manufacturers, with third-party platforms who will do marketing and promotion for you. We're kind of long past an era of if you build it, they will come. And actually, a lot of the time, I think sports federations have maybe underemphasized how complicated and expensive a lot of that user acquisition was actually going to be. And because of that, they sort of, I think people have got increasingly realistic about understanding that maybe you can build something that's in that more niche space, that is a subscription offering for power viewers, but you shouldn't assume that it's going to take over the world.
So naturally, I completely agree. And I think naturally what's manifested from that is now people are looking at other alternatives, other approaches, a hybrid, a multifaceted distribution approach. And also now, of course, YouTube is becoming more and more part of that conversation. What's your view on whether if someone's looking to look for different distribution channels, whether they should be putting legitimate rights on a platform like that and trying to lean into that advertising economy that exists there? Naturally, being on YouTube, you have to be there in some way, shape or form. If you're whether a sports property or a platform itself, you need to have something visible there. But do you think that is a viable road for sports to be really focused on putting their live content at the moment, or should they be pointing them elsewhere?
I think it's clearly a credible path, but I do think it's a very, very difficult path as well. Trying to compete for attention on YouTube means you're competing with the world of creators. You're competing with, an incredible mix of content that a lot of the time means you won't get front and center because you become kind of commoditized into a tile in this aggregated experience that has more content than the world could ever watch in our collective lifetimes. I think it's definitely a complementary distribution option. I think for some sports, in particular in dark markets, it can be a great way to kind of offer power users a way to consume your content where you don't have broadcast support, but you're looking to minimize your kind of costs and level of investment. Do I think that it's a credible path for tier one domestic rights holders to put their content for free on YouTube? Right now, it doesn't feel like necessarily the ARPU is going to pencil out.
So looking back to what's happened there in terms of Delta Tray acquiring an Endo Streaming, and obviously their focus, they do more than just OTT platforms, but that has been their bread and butter for quite a long time. What do you see that turning into? What's your view? Do you think it'll just be an expansion, having the biggest and most robust client base and finding different ways to bring that to life, or will there be any other changes that you would expect perhaps for them to be considering to tackle a changing marketplace?
To me, it feels like a lot of that consolidation is probably a little bit inevitable in a market that is maybe shrinking in different ways. Like there are new opportunities in certain places, whether it's emerging markets, whether it's, particular new sports aggregations, whether it's smaller federations looking to build like power user experiences. But generally, the sort of trend I talked about earlier where maybe every federation is no longer kind of kicking a football around in their office and umming and ahhing about whether or not they should go direct to consumer. I think it means that there probably is a bit of compression. And therefore, as margins start to get pulled down, you inevitably see consolidation of businesses that maybe used to compete for the same clients. They do have an amazing stable of clients now when you combine the kind of the existing Delta Tray client base with that like real blue chip selection of businesses that kind of ran on top of Endeavor Streaming. It also, by the way, will be like an amazing opportunity to kind of consolidate a really, really experienced set of engineering teams and, really build a kind of best-in-class video engineering group that ultimately, will kind of exist in Europe and be able to build these brilliant consumer experiences. I would say probably, and again, I have no insight into the way that Delta Tray are going to approach this, but they will need to keep layering on incremental areas of value that they can offer to sports federations to become a bit more of a one-stop shop. I think you can probably see this in different places in the sports media industry, but people are trying to layer in additional areas of competency to be able to capture probably more of the kind of engagement with a sports federation than potentially you would do if you're like pure play kind of OTT white label partner. And that's probably happening at different areas in the industry, but in particular, that's probably what the kind of Delta Tray acquisition feels like.
In simple terms, building, instead of looking for more clients, building out the existing value of those accounts is definitely has to be a key focus. We've seen some of those betting companies, obviously you're familiar with that market, being very good at focusing and of expanding its skill set to
get more value out of the client, for one of a less harsher way of saying it. But that's basically the name of the game, to try and build on what is quite a small marketplace, really, in relative terms, and in terms of the top end.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like that type of expansion is a very traditional way for suppliers to think about maximizing the lifetime value of their sort of business partners. So it feels like a very rational direction to kind of look at, even as you continue to try to target new clients, maybe in greenfield areas.
So I want to look forward now. Look forward to what you see within sports, and then we'll go to Tubi to wrap things up. But with sports, where do you see the future of the industry going? Like, do you think that, because I think you probably go back to, say, when OTT became a thing, and there was a lot of excitement about this new era. Now I think there's equal amounts of uncertainty as to what the future really looks like in this fast changing world of media consumption. Just what do you think? And do you think that sports, and because of its live value, is still going to continue to prosper, or do you think it does have some challenging needs to differentiate further to what it's offering as a broadcast product?
Opining on the future of sports, I think so. I would say one is, I think live sports will continue to have a very unique place in customer engagement and attention, and it will continue to drive eyeballs. I mean, these collective moments, I think there are fewer and fewer of them, in the way that, like, fragmentation of consumption means that everybody's media diet now is very different, and the channels through which people consume media are totally varied. Like, the difference between mine versus somebody who's like 10 years younger than me will be completely chalk and cheese. I'll spend a lot more time in front of a TV. They'll spend a lot more time on, whether it's short form video, whether it's, kind of very different models of engagement. But one of the things that does seem to pull people together and really create those kind of moments of kind of collective excitement, collective agony, it is sport. So I think there will always continue, or at least in the in the medium term, there will continue to be a big premium placed against it. It probably, however, does mean that there will continue to be a gap between the top tier sports and the top tier federations and everybody else, and it will probably become a bit of a haves and have-nots story for a period of time. If I was a federation, I would be constantly focused on diversification, on experimenting with different ways to reach my audience, to think about really having incremental revenue opportunities so that you don't have single points of failure in the like traditional value chain. And honestly, I sort of think like the biggest thing that's going to happen over the next decade is going to be this shift from broadcast to digital, the kind of final unbundling, which will be accelerated by a lot of the big tech companies shifting into the space and going after the tier one rights. But I think there's that sort of Mark Twain quote of like, the rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Like, it will also stick around and will continue to be a place where specific generations consume all of their content, whether it's news, whether it's entertainment, whether it's sport. And so completely discounting it, I think, doesn't make any sense. So yeah, to me, the unwinding of the broadcast bundle is probably going to be painful for the messy middle of kind of sports federations and the kind of vendor rights values attached to them. But it doesn't mean there isn't really unique opportunity to diversify and to make sure that you as a federation are looking for new ways to build passion from your fans, to create touch points so that you can manage the message more directly, and then ultimately look to sort of drive monetization of your fan base.
And so finally, let's go to Tubi. Now, I'm going to ask you it this way. I say, how much of your time is spent on focusing on your established markets versus how much time is looking towards newer markets?
So, I mean, I would say I'm probably... Oh, now, when you say newer markets, do you mean potential future expansion?
Potential markets, sorry, yeah. Potential.
So right now we're growing so quickly in all of the markets that we're already in that it is occupying a lot of time just to scale the organization to support the massive amount of growth. I mean, 100 million monthly active users is a lot of scale to handle, and we want to make sure that we delight absolutely every single one of them. Having said that, we definitely do spend time thinking about what our footprint could be in the sort of short to medium to long term. And our expectation is that we are going to be looking to grow the number of markets we're in, most likely within the next sort of 12 to 24 months.
Well, look, I think from my point of view, everyone I've spoken to has been following your journey and Tubi's journey very, very closely, because they're quite excited to see its rate of growth and obviously aligning that with what's happening on the advertising side of the industry. It seems everyone is really keen to see definitely another player continue to grow and scale and become one of the major platforms right across the world that is hopefully making more moves into sports and get more of the sports industry's content out there into more places. But David, it's been great to talk to you and to hear a little bit more about what you've been doing with Tubi and also your thoughts on the industry. And I really thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you in less than 2 months' time in Madrid at the SportsPro Media Summit, where you'll be on stage sharing more thoughts about the state of play.
Yeah, my pleasure, Nick. Great to chat.